Stephen Harper's prime ministership did introduce one very new thing to Canadian politics, the notion of the perpetual campaign. Harper's Conservatives even launched all-out attack wars against new opposition leaders well before the actual election campaigns even began. Longtime Toronto Star columnist Susan Delacourt focused on the permanent marketing angle of the Harper years, contributed a chapter to the Harper Factor on that, and she joins us now from the nation's capital with more. Hi, Susan. Good to have you on TVO again.
Hi. Nice to be back.
Just before we start our conversation, let's remind everybody, we're going to go back here about 10 years, and I want to play a little ad which I think kind of sums up the way that the Harper Conservatives played politics. If you would, Mr. Director, roll it, please.
Stefan, we didn't get it done. We didn't get it done, and we have to get it done, and we have to understand.
This is unfair.
We didn't get it done.
This is unfair. You don't know what to speak about. Do you think it's easy to make priorities?
Leaders set priorities. Leaders get things done. Stéphane Dion is not a leader.
And remembering, the election hadn't been called yet when that ad started to run, but this idea of the perpetual campaign, where'd that come from for the Harper Conservatives?
Well, I think probably it was a function of a minority government, but also a prime minister who kept his eye on the next election all the time. They were in a permanent state of readiness. I think Tom Flanagan, Harper's old campaign chief, called it the garrison party. You know, they were constantly keeping themselves armed in case an election was held any moment. And I think, you know, it's dangerous to do pop psychology on politicians, but Harper, throughout his prime ministership, really wanted to see the end of the Liberal Party, and why wait until an election to do that when you can do that 24/7? So
it was an approach that suited his personality as well, you figure?
I do think, and those people around him too. You know, the Conservatives had been in opposition for a long time, and they were very much an opposition party, even in government. You know, that you'd see, and this was all new to us back then. You know, we didn't see the government asking questions of the opposition or doing opposition type research on their own opposition. And it all contributed to a sense that we were permanently in a campaign. That an election could be called any minute. We were going to see an election any minute. There was no difference between an election campaign and governing. And that continued even when he had a majority.
Every government, of course, wants to control the message that it disseminates to its voters and the general public. Was Stephen Harper any particularly different than his predecessors in the way he managed that?
Very definitely, and I'd go back to my other book about this, not to give, not to mix up books here, but when I was writing my book on political marketing, I was really struck by the people around Harper who said he was our first baby boomer prime minister, and he was the first person who had grown up with the media is the message. You know, that he was very sensitive to image, and he had a big say in sort of the design and look of the party too. A huge attention to marketing type details. He liked people who paid attention to those type of details. So we saw a government that introduced backdrops at events, you know, that every marketing detail was paid attention to. And I think that was Stephen Harper. He had a keen sense of advertising and marketing. And I think some of his problems with journalists, frankly, was that he thought of journalists as tools of advertising or marketing. And so when we didn't do our jobs as good advertisers or marketers for him, he didn't see the purpose of us. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say he was also very famous for delivering very targeted tax breaks, in some respects sort of breaking up the electorate into, if you like, consumer groups. You know, put your kids in hockey, you get a tax break, get a subway pass, you get a tax break. Ultimately, did that turn out to be a positive thing politically for the Conservatives?
Very definitely. Remember, we were also, the Harper years ushered in the age of data and big data politics. And they were the first to learn how to segment the electorate into winning little groups. They didn't have their eye on big majorities. They had their eye on niche markets across the country. There are so many ways in which marketing language infused the Harper years. Those tax credits you talked about, remember, were called boutique tax credits. Niche marketing. All of it was about seeing people and seeing votes as something that could be purchased, and that people's concerns, they're not bought like in the old days of Tammany Hall, but they were bought in reach them close to their homes, give them the things they want, give them bargains, sort of politics as a big box discount store.
Let's talk about the approach during question period, because I guess typically the opposition sort of attacks in an aggressive fashion during question period, and the government tends to be on its heels as it responds. But the Harper Conservatives did question period differently. They gave as good as they got and often went much further. Tell us about the story when the Public Safety Minister, Vic Taves, tried to suggest to the opposition that, well, you know the line, right?
Yes, you're either with us or with the child pornographers.
Right. What did that represent?
Yeah, again, the permanent campaign, the permanent hostile campaign, and as we know, that didn't work all that well. They were a very aggressive fighting marketing machine in there. A lot of their question period performances were generated with the idea of producing little clips and sound bites that they could send out and keep their masses mobilized. That the Conservatives were expert fundraisers, and they used question period for that too. They would send out letters all the time to their supporters and would-be supporters, and they were always on a war footing. They were always fighting somebody. I think my favorite was when they sent out one against the health department, when they were in government, and they were fighting their own government often. It was an outsider, a very outsider government, which again is consistent with Harper's feeling that he was on the outside of Ottawa too, looking in all the time. They never, for all the talk of it being the Harper government, they always gave the idea that there was someplace else they should be, that Ottawa was a town that belonged to elites and liberals, and that these were the rebel outsiders come in to teach Ottawa and all those elites how to be in better touch.
I think I remember in late 2005, during the election campaign leading up to his first victory in 2006, he had a line something like, "Don't worry about giving me a victory. After all, the Supreme Court's still liberal, the civil service is still liberal, all the institutions in Ottawa are still liberal, so there'll be a check on us." He really believed, I guess, that he was surrounded on all sides by big and small L liberals. Is that right?
Yes, and don't forget that almost 10 years later, his unbelievable spat with the Supreme Court of Canada, very public spat with Beverly McLaughlin. And it was all about knocking down those institutions. I don't think he ever got over the sense that the dice were loaded against him here.
This may be a little example, but anybody who watches question period may know that before it actually starts, ordinary backbench MPs are allowed to get up, and they're basically given whatever it is, a minute to say whatever they like. Sometimes they talk about the strawberry social that's happening in their riding the coming weekend, or they congratulate somebody on turning 100 years old or something. The Conservatives used those previously innocuous member statements once again for sort of aggressive partisan advantage over their adversaries. Why did they do that?
This was explained to me by one of the people who used to work in the war rooms with them when they were in opposition. They realized that the media arrived at question period a few minutes before it started, and so they started loading up these really aggressive partisan, hyper-partisan attacks using those member statements to kind of get a jump on question period. And it worked so well, and they were having so much fun with it, that standing orders, as they're called, for the 15 minutes before question period became, again, another way of churning out attack lines against the opposition or any critics. It was, I think even some conservatives, in fact, the one who had helped write these or helped devise that strategy when they were in opposition, thought it had gone too far by, about 5 or 6 years into the mandate. The constant attack mode was wearing.
Well, that's what I wondered. Were they not concerned that when Liberals and New Democrats and Greens were standing up talking about innocuous events happening in the riding, these guys looked like bullies doing that?
Well, the Liberals, all the other ones started doing it too. You know as well as I do, Steve, that politics will find its lowest level like water, right? And so things did. So of course everybody started it. It's been interesting to see how much of that is gone now. In the last year and a half, a lot of the permanent campaign is gone. Although the parties are still on election footing, and I think some of the changes that Harper brought in, definitely the pioneer in big data politics and political marketing and sensitivity to the marketing of the Prime Minister, that continues under Justin Trudeau.
But what does it suggest to you that, again, under Justin Trudeau, he doesn't want any applause from his backbench when he says something in the House of Commons or when a minister answers a question? They've taken a lot of the kind of vitriol out of question period and out of those member statements. What does that say to you?
Well, it says those changes are, yes, and I think we're all a bit relieved about that too. Question period was becoming unwatchable. And it was interesting to see that it was heading down that road again about a year ago, and then there was the famous incident in which Trudeau crossed the floor and elbowed an NDP MP in the chest. And I talked to a bunch of MPs. I did a project last summer of talking to rookie MPs, and I was surprised how many MPs said that incident and that week marked a sort of a pause moment in the House of Commons here. And I think Trudeau articulated it as, wait a minute, we just got past all that, and let's not go down that road again. And you do see things being dialed back because it's very easy for politicians to take the low road.
Okay, in which case, in our last minute here, let's talk about how much you think all of the things that we have been talking about contributed to the Harper government's ultimate defeat a little over a year ago.
Hard question. I think probably people tired of the constant and permanent campaign. I think the cynicism was something that the public was eager to get rid of. I'm not sure that you'll ever get rid of cynicism in politics in this day and age, but I do think that the 2015 vote was a rejection of how cynical politics had become. Some people are saying that Trudeau, with all these broken promises, is reviving it these days. I'll leave that to another show for you. but I think I do believe that people had had enough by then.
Susan, it's good of you to come on TVO with us tonight and talk about your chapter in the Harper Factor, Assessing a Prime Minister's Policy Legacy. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.